Hello and welcome to Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. If it's your first time, welcome to the conversation. If you're coming back, glad to have you. Let's dive into this conversation. As the circular economy takes shape, the role of recycling is going to evolve. Today's recycling infrastructure is closely aligned with the waste management system, but there are growing signs that reuse of products will become more important and recycling services will become built into the product lifecycle as the last step when no more reuse is possible. That will not diminish the importance of recycling because recovery and processing of metal, glass, paper, and plastic, as well as the provenance and quality of the recycled materials that are produced using them, will remain essential to keeping those materials in circulation and in compliance with regulations. For example, like that it's safe to use with food packaging. We need to understand all of these materials and their full and repeated life cycles in our lives. Our guest today is Robin Wiener, president of ISRI, the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. She leads the Washington, D.C.-based trade group that advocates for recycling standards, recycling safety, and recycling best practices in the $117 billion a year recovery industry. Following China's announcement in 2018 that it would no longer accept contaminated recyclables, the U.S. recycling industry had to retrench and look for new markets for scrap materials, as well as begin to build more domestic processing capacity. In the last year, for example, billions of dollars have been deployed to launch new battery, plastic, and paper recycling capabilities. And during the next decade, hundreds of billions of dollars of additional recycled materials are expected to be collected, processed, and reused to support a sustainable economy. We don't have time for all the questions about what ISRI is working on, so let's make a big dent in the topic. You can learn more about the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries at www.isri, that's I-S-R-I, ISRI.org. Now let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the show, Robin. How are you doing today?
Doing great. It's great to be here talking to you. So thank you for asking me to do this, Mitch.
Well, thank you for doing it, and good to see you again. It's been a while. I wanted to start off kind of getting an idea of the scope of the recycling industry. ISRI still quotes a 2017 number, which was about $117 billion in revenue across the various forms of scrap recycling. Where are we today? Are you seeing more material collected?
Well, first of all, the 117 billion is actually the U.S. economic impact, and it's a 2021 number.
Okay.
Every 2 years, we update. We actually hire an outside third-party firm to help us evaluate and look at the economics of the industry. Mm-hmm. And the latest was done for 2021. It was done in 22 for 21. And it showed $117 billion economic impact. We're due again next year, so we'll have some updated numbers, and I would envision it'll be about the same, maybe a little bit higher. Depends upon commodity prices, as you can imagine, supply and demand industry. In terms of volumes, 40 million metric tons of material processed in the U.S. every year for recycling, and that's material that's being processed to create commodity grade material that is then used domestically as well as by industries around the world.
So a lot of the measure of the economic impact is dependent upon the prices of commodities. Do you see that recyclables are starting to gain traction in the marketplace? It's been a very volatile year across all commodities prices, but are recycled materials being more highly valued?
Commodity prices remain volatile, and they always have been. So there's nothing new about that. It is a class. Recycled materials are a classic supply-demand commodity. So just like oil, your price of gas goes up and down, corn, soybeans, etc. Same thing. And there are global markets, and therefore the pricing is susceptible to changes in or barriers that might increase transportation-wise, industrial or manufacturing activity domestically as globally. Challenges that are happening globally, such as the Ukraine war between Russia and Ukraine can have an impact. The UAW strike. So all of these things affect commodity prices. And also Recycled materials are a bucket of commodities.
Right.
From copper, aluminum, steel to paper, different kinds of plastics. So whereas one may be up, another one is down. So we definitely see changes within and differences within that bucket.
Well, the global recycling system had two major shocks. There was the national sword policy announced by China in 2017 that they put into action in 2018. And then, of course, the pandemic, which raised the cost of shipping stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
What kinds of innovations are you seeing in domestic recycling, particularly recycling processing capabilities 5 years after National Sword, and in response to that kind of let's bring it home and keep the supply chains more tightly oriented?
Great question. And they had disparate impacts. The major impact with China and National Sword was on the quality of the recycled material. And you have to remember, and you know this, that where the average consumer, when they think of recycling, they think of that blue bin at the end of the driveway. The truth is that that's only 10 to 15% of recycled material in the US. And the major part of the system that was impacted by National Sword was that 10 or 15%. So there were all those headlines about recycling is broken, or there's problems with the recycling system. It's because that 10 to 15%, which was not of its high quality, was what was most impacted by the stoppage of the low quality material being shipped to China. So the blowback it had was in the residential sector, with more of a focus than within the MRFs and the residential recycling facilities, focus more on how do they improve their processes to improve quality, but also educate consumers about what goes in the bin and what doesn't, because we have a lot of, I don't call it lazy recycling, but people didn't know what went in the bin and they just threw it in there and didn't know if it could actually be recycled. It used to be that if you weren't sure, throw it in, of course it'll get recycled. Well, the general rule now is if you're not sure, don't put it in the bin. Don't contaminate. But there's definitely also been a huge, there's been a lot of innovation that's occurred with AI in particular that has entered into a lot of the residential as well as industrial manufacture or recycling operations that have, so there's laser and optical scanning systems, there's robotics, which has also helped with quality. COVID, it was a little different. With COVID, focus was on the supply chains. Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, there was great recognition of the importance of recycling and that recycling is part of a stable and secure supply chain. So that's a positive that occurred as a result of COVID. But certainly as a result of both COVID and National Sword, we have seen more investment in U.S. recycled materials consumption. So paper mills, there's been a great investment in paper mills here in the U.S. that are using recycled materials. We're seeing the same thing there's more plastics recycling investment in the U.S. So we're seeing this across a number of commodities, still very much a global industry. And I don't know that that's going to change, but I think there is certainly a greater increase in domestic consumption.
Well, the other 85% of recyclables that you mentioned, I think are really important for everyone to understand that as companies embrace less or more zero waste to landfill approaches, that there's a lot more material being captured. And it's not just at manufacturing, but in the back rooms of grocers where immense amounts of plastic and cardboard are used, for instance. Tell us a little more about how that has evolved as an industry.
Well, one of the things that we all have to remember is that this is valuable material. It's worth something. It has value.
Yeah.
I think that most manufacturers have always understood that has value. And so there is a very strong infrastructure that exists within the US for the capture of that material. And over the last 20, 25 years, there's also been a greater awareness among retailers, commercial facilities, schools, etc., that and office complexes of the value of this material. So there's more of it available, and the collection systems have certainly improved.
Now, as we continue to optimize our economy, You have been involved in trying to drive design for recyclability. Can you tell us about the recyclability protocol and the design for recyclability process that you've put in place? And are packaging designers engaging with you all in order to make what they produce more recyclable?
Absolutely. Well, and I think this raises a really important point that permeates all that at least ISRI does,
Mhm.
and that is a key component of our success, which is we believe very strongly in collaboration. Just as there are no panaceas to most of the challenges that we face, whether it's in this industry or in other industries, there's also very little that any one of us in a narrow segment of the economy can do on our own. We need to work together with others that are stakeholders, and so that is very true in this space. So we work very closely with consumer brands, with manufacturers to promote design for recycling. And I joined ISRI back in 1989. And in 89, we were talking about design for recycling. So this is not a new concept. It's working with manufacturers on helping them prioritize end of life. And it's not even end of life, but part of
End of,
the
end of use is the way that we're referring to it today.
make sure that they understand that that should be an equal priority as cost and safety and all the other things that are work into their design process. And so we want to be able to recycle as much of a product at the end of that use as possible. And so we've done everything from we've got an annual Design for Recycling award, and we've given that over the years to Samsung, to Dell, to Cascade, to a number of manufacturers throughout the economy to recognize the steps that they've all taken to make their products more recyclable, as well as for using recycled content in their products. We also have an annual youth video and poster contest where we work with K through 12 students to promote various concepts within recycling. And this year's contest is all about design for recycling. We're encouraging them to find a consumer product and tell us how to educate and make changes to make it more recyclable. There's a lot more we're doing. We're working directly with the consumer brands as packaging becomes more complicated.
Mhm.
We have a Consumer Brands Council, a Brands Leadership Council, with about 11 different major consumer brands, including Unilever, Starbucks, McDonald's, Keurig, Dr. Pepper, where we're working with them on the concept of design for recycling and creating greater collaboration between the brands and recyclers. And then you mentioned the protocol. Our protocol, we started right at the beginning of the pandemic. It got slowed down a little bit because of the pandemic. It's going to be released actually, I believe it's next week. So your timing is great. And the focus of that is on giving a standard or guidelines to the brands and their engineers about how to make fiber-based packaging more compatible with the recycling stream. So we're really excited about that.
So a couple of things I want to unpack with what you just said. And going back to 1989, this is a movement that's been going on for a long time, but do you see an accelerated adoption of the idea of design for recyclability, particularly in recent years as companies have begun to embrace ESG reporting and so forth?
Absolutely. I think that actually there's a number of reasons. There's more awareness. The national sort of in some ways woke up the general public about recycling and the fact that it's a market-based system. So there's a lot more attention to it. And then also, as we move towards net zero by 2050, as well as there's a greater focus on decarbonization, there's an understanding that part of the answer is sustainability, which includes as one of its elements recycling. And then also the whole debate over critical minerals, the move to electric vehicles. All of this requires securing materials that are already in products. And so that requires recycling.
Now, the other thing you mentioned is that packaging, as we all know, is getting more complicated. But the move to design to recyclability also suggests we should simplify packaging and standardize on a few more recyclable materials, which we have. There's a couple of types of plastic that are highly recyclable. How does ISRI see the opportunity to simplify packaging, and what guidance do you give a Unilever or someone like that when you're talking with them?
The protocol will be certainly a big tool that's going to help them. We're also very much part of conversations, whether it's through the Recycling Partnership, which we're a part of. I actually sit on the board of directors for Recycling Partnership, which is composed of a lot of the brands and the other material companies and packaging companies. And we're having continual discussions about this. And we are collaborating on projects to promote recyclability. We're also working through Keep America Beautiful, actually to focus working with local communities about collecting more of the material. So there's a lot of work being done through dialogue, conversation, and just greater understanding. At the same time, yes, some of packaging is getting more complicated, but I would say that there is progress being made. Still a lot more progress needs to be made, but there is some progress being made.
So let's say we make a lot of progress. How much more material does ISRI believe we can collect and process if we are designing for recyclability consistently? Could we move our plastics recovery rate substantially up, our corrugated cardboard, and so forth?
It's a great question. I wish I could put a number on it. I can't. I don't know anyone who's done that. And I think the opportunity varies by commodity. And plastics are a great example because one of the challenges with plastics is also a bucket. It's not one material. It's a lot of different materials. And the ability to recycle each of those different polymers varies considerably. And this is going to sound shocking for me to say, but not everything can or should be recycled. So I hate it when people talk about that general plastics recycling rate.
Understood.
Yeah, that combines so many things that are never going to be recycled with types of plastics that are highly recyclable and do have high recycling rates. So we really do. This is an area where, unfortunately, it is detail oriented and it is a little complicated and it's hard to make simple.
Well, and a lot of our listeners and readers will write in and ask us about that 6% number. And of course, there's some materials like PET that's collected at a 28, 29% rate. And that doesn't come through when you talk about these big, broad numbers. But let me ask you this. Do you think the single stream is a viable solution to our problem, or do we need really a more diversified recycling industry, which in some ways represents what your members are? They're not part of the single stream. They're steel and metal recycling companies. They are specialized electronics recyclers and so forth.
Well, there's a lot in that question.
Yeah.
I would say that certainly as I travel all around the world, talking to my counterparts and talking to other governments about increasing recycling rates and what the challenges are. And definitely the system we have in the US is different than the system in, for example, Europe, where it's not single stream. They are focused on defining the streams. And the reason for doing that is contamination, is increasing the quality. In the US, I don't know if we're ever going to get away from single stream.
Could we augment it though?
Yeah, and that's somewhat what's happening. We hit on that earlier. When you think about the AI, so robotics and the optical scanning and all the innovation that's occurring in processing, I think that's trying to get us over the hurdle of the challenges that are in single stream. I mean, the concept behind single stream was there would be more collected because it'll be easier for the consumer. And I think given our culture in the US, I don't know if we're ever going to get away from that. There was a movement, you may remember this, probably 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even longer, where we were going to go into what did they call it, one bin, that I think was horrible. It was the combining of the waste with that single stream. Thank God we've moved generally away from that in most places, but I don't know that we'll ever move away from single stream.
What kinds of investments do you think we need to make as a nation, not necessarily individual companies, but as a nation, in order to accelerate this transition to a more distributed approach to recycling? Something where we pushed a little more of the sorting to the edge of the network instead of trying to collect it, then sort it.
I think that it's an interesting question. I think that we can make some progress is if we have more of a national approach for dealing with some of the problem materials that are in the stream. or that could get in the stream that shouldn't be in it. I know you want to ask about batteries, but batteries are a good example. Film,
Yep.
and I don't mean film for taking photos, but the plastic film. Though these are materials that and products that can be recycled, should be recycled, but should not go into that bin.
Yeah.
Because then they cause contamination or safety issues, and so they have the effect of hurting recycling rates rather than increasing them. But if we have separate systems for collecting those, and we're working with a number of states and other entities to try to get that done, but that's where more investment, I think, would help tremendously.
This is a really important conversation. I want to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back to continue talking with Robin Wiener. And we are back to continue talking with Robin Wiener. She's the president of ISRI, that's the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. So, Robin, let's talk a little about this idea that is becoming very prominent of the circular economy. It's the idea that everything keeps in use, that we reuse it over and over. But of course, the first step is always the consumer or the business user who uses something and when finished with it needs to put it back in the system. How does ISRI and its members help engage consumers to help them easily find and use recycling options when there are no other options like reuse available?
We are generally not consumer facing, ISRI's organization. But we work with, some of our members are, and we work with other organizations and support other organizations that are. We've also become a little bit more aggressive in terms of offering assistance and support in those areas. So I just this morning, I think I mentioned I'm on the board of Recycling Partnership, and this morning we just had a board meeting, and this is one of the things we talked about. We talk about how do we get more education out there and in the hands of consumers so they know what can be recycled. And so we're also working with organizations such as yours and others that are getting information out there. We're working with the state of South Carolina, for example. They approached us to for assistance on how to improve their recycling system and the infrastructure within the state, and then including education piece. So we're working with them on a battery campaign that will help educate consumers about what to do with your batteries, the small batteries, when they've reached the end of life. So it's through partnerships. And I should mention Keep America Beautiful. I also sit on their board, and they also have a very important piece of this, because there's all that material that is that becomes available for recycling in public spaces, in and in other areas such as that. And Keep America Beautiful plays a role in helping getting education out to consumers and putting bins out there for recycling in those spaces. So there, again, it's working together with a lot of different entities. It takes a group to do this. It takes a village, I guess. It's not any one entity.
It takes a village and an IT team.
That's true. That's true.
Now, you've got a lot of these kind of informative programs like the Protocol for Fiber-Based Packaging, which helps assess the fiber packaging recyclability and all the challenges that might be involved in handling it. Those, to me, seem like something we could help expose to consumers in some way so they could make better decisions. And in other words, to buy more recyclable stuff in the first place. It's something we're referring to on Earth911 as pre-cycling. Is that something you've thought about, how to help communicate to the people who ultimately determine what is going to end up in the recycling stream, buy better things?
Yes, and I'd like to say that we have a solution, but we don't. The challenge that I see it's labeling. It's the issue of what's on the package. And as you're probably aware, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are, there's confusion because of the triangles that are on different packaging, because those were never meant to say this could be recycled. It was meant to tell you what type of material it was. Right. And then there are other groups out there like SPC and others that have had the how to recycle label. The problem is that there is no universal label, and they're still confusing. I know the Federal Trade Commission is looking at this issue now. And EPA is also looking at the issue, and I hope we'll have a solution soon, because I'll be honest with you, my own household, there are times I pause and I look at something and I say, does this go in the bin? And I don't know the answer. And if I don't know the answer or you don't know the answer, we definitely have a challenge in the system.
At my house, I edit the trash. And I pull the stuff out that needed to go into the recycling bin. But this is the problem. And my family, because of me, knows this stuff pretty well, and it still doesn't effectively exercise the knowledge. Now, one of the things I think we're all working towards, since we're in the middle of this sustainability transition, is having a shared language. You have a program called the Common Language for Recycled Materials Industry, and there's another organization, SWEEP, which is a new standard for it's essentially lead for waste management organizations. We're talking with them and others about how do you create a common nomenclature. Is that something that you think is a tractable problem in the first place, given all the complexity we're talking about?
Well, I'm not familiar with SWEEP, so I know of them, but I don't know the details of what they're doing. But I'll explain what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Sure.
Part of the challenge has been that until the last few years, recycling was a general concept, but no one really understood what it was, and they didn't need to understand what it was. Mm-hmm. We're in a lot of policy discussions around it. It wasn't a focus out in the public, really. Mm-hmm. And so we were doing what we were doing. It was going along fine, but we didn't know how to talk about what we were doing. And we have our own internal language we use. Every industry has their own internal language. The word scrap is our own internal language. We have specifications that mean nothing to anyone else. So if we sit with a legislator or sit with any sort of policymaker or someone, a journalist, and try to explain what we were doing, it didn't mean anything. Yeah. And so we realized that we had to figure out what was the language that resonated that best explained what it is that we do. And so we hired a language expert, those actually exist, to help us figure out what is the language. And so you should not be hearing the S word from me anymore. We don't talk about scrap anymore. We talk about recycled materials and the recycled materials industry. We don't talk about, even though I think that recycled materials are beautiful, that input that goes into the recycling operation is beautiful, it looks unfortunately like garbage. It's not, but it looks like trash. And so I recognize it's not, but that doesn't resonate with anyone. What resonates with people is the fact that the wire that's feeding into their home that allows them to use their Xbox and watch TV, etc., is copper made from recycled material. But the car they drive is not, the steel in it is 70 to 90% recycled steel. That the road they're on may have recycled tires from rubber in it. So we need to really talk about the output, how it's being used.
Yeah.
And also, I think that what's happened with COVID, with better understanding of the general public about supply chain, has also helped. And so we're talking more about the role of recycled materials in the supply chain for manufacturing.
So listening to what you've said so far, I guess my meta question is, how do you see the role of recycling in this emerging circular economy? We're going to be adding more reuse. We're going to be repairing more, hopefully. We're going to be doing a lot of things to extend the life cycle of products and packaging. Where should we think about recycling as a part of our lives as consumers or as business users who throw out a lot of stuff as well?
Well, the recycled materials industry and recycled materials provide a renewable source of high quality materials for the everyday items and our infrastructure that we rely upon every day. Whether, again, it's the car we drive, the wires that feed our homes, the packaging the products you bought from Amazon arrive at your door in, all of that is made out of recycled material. And it's critical to a stable and secure supply chain, domestically and globally. And that's how we're talking about the material more. And it's also, it's being better understood, I think, by policymakers. It's interesting, if you think about the transition to electric vehicles and the need, therefore, for those batteries, that will require nickel, copper, lithium, materials that we know cannot all be sourced and should not be sourced from virgin materials or from extracted from the earth. And the policies that are being developed by the US government as well as global entities have as one of their pillars the use of recycled materials. So it's critical to the circular economy as well as to sustainable future.
So make things last as long as possible, but always make sure that they get back into the recycling system when you are cannot do anything else.
But it goes back to what I said before. There's no panacea.
Yeah.
Reuse isn't going to solve everything. Recycling isn't going to solve everything. You're still going to. These are all pieces of the puzzle.
A couple of other things have come up recently, and I'm impressed with the fact that you've defined very clearly what you think constitutes plastic recycling. And we've had several molecular or chemical or advanced recycling people on the show. You don't believe that recycling, in other words, waste to energy, is recycling. Tell us what plastic recycling is and what it should be.
We define plastic recycling as the series of activities that process end-of-life plastics into marketable commodities that are subsequently consumed in lieu of virgin materials as feedstocks in the manufacturing process. So not in the production of energy or fuel. So it's basically material to material is the shorthand. That is recycling. That's not to say that use of that material in a process that creates energy or fuel is bad or not needed. It's just properly define what each of these activities are.
The nomenclature we were talking about.
Exactly.
Now, I want to ask a question about your advocacy for an exemption from the Environmental Protection Agency about the handling of PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances that are known as forever chemicals and found in virtually everything, for the recycling industry. A lot of people would take that as you're trying to dodge some kind of responsibility, but why are you doing it? And I think there's a reason that makes sense.
Yes. The issue with we are certainly the core value for ISRI is, and for our members is responsible recycling. So ensuring workforce and workplace safety, recycling according to all environmental laws and going beyond compliance, etc. PFAS is a different issue because PFAS is a bucket of chemicals that are in everything. We didn't produce them. We didn't ask for them. They show up in the products that in the everyday products that make it through the recycling system, and there could be releases during their when they are being processed. Just as I know that the waste industry is also a passive receiver when it comes to the landfills. Cities and towns are dealing with this right now in their water systems. All of us are passive receivers. We're on the same situation. We're not responsible for the production or the use of the material, and those that produced it should be responsible for it.
So would you advocate for extended producer responsibility for anything that contains PFAS, and in order to better fund the infrastructure so that we can safely process this stuff? Is that the right way for us to start thinking about distributing responsibility?
We're not talking about EPR here because EPR is a very different concept. EPR, which we don't necessarily support, we don't view it as the panacea, others view it as, it has to do with the recycling and providing support for recycling systems for certain recycled materials. This has nothing to do with the recyclability of product. This has to do with putting responsibility on companies that produced something that is potentially toxic or hazardous, that does not belong in a system and is causing others problems. And so there, whether it's 3M or the other entities that produce this material, should have responsibility for identifying the means of handling any contamination that might occur, whether it's in a water system, as a result of that a lot of the towns are dealing with, towns and municipalities, whether it's in a landfill, the waste industry is dealing with, whether it's in a recycling facility. We need to understand and get guidance from them on how to deal with it. And it's going to be costly to handle these problems, and they should be paying for it. It's not we are passive receivers. We did not produce this material.
Thanks for making the distinction between EPR as a policy and the idea that these people are responsible for the stuff they make. I think that's an important distinction. Let's talk a little about safety, which you've mentioned a couple of times during the course of the conversation. EPA has studied battery-related fires in recycling facilities. There have been 245 fires in 64 waste facilities between 2013 and 2020. What can listeners do when recycling consumer electronics or batteries to reduce the occurrence of fires and the danger to recycling workers? Because I know you've spent a lot of time on that.
Critical issue, and I really appreciate you raising it. But I want to be clear that this is not just a recycling issue. There have been articles I've seen about, like up in New York City, there have been some scooters that have blown up and e-bikes that have blown up and caused fires in apartment buildings. They certainly do occur in recycling operations as well as in everyday use. The issue is that the electric or the new chemicals or different chemicals that are being used for batteries can cause fires. And so they need to be collected separately they should not be put in the bin. They should be put aside and collected separately. You got to follow manufacturing instructions. You should keep them out of reach of children. I understand that one of the highest or largest causes of kids, small children, going to operating rooms these days are swallowing those button batteries.
Yeah.
It's an everyday use problem as well. And so we're working with states, with EPA, with the battery manufacturers on consumer awareness. There's a campaign that's going to be launched next month, I think it is, or in November, in the state of South Carolina called Take Charge, Be Battery Smart, where there's going to be signage and information sent to homes about how to handle these small consumer batteries. Mm-hmm. But we're also dealing with EV batteries. And the advent of more EVs are going to be showing up in recycling facilities. And there are also very big issues associated with them. And we're worried about our workforce being safe, as well as the use of these materials. So we actually have been doing a lot in terms of training, of training the workforce in terms of how to be safe in terms of both mitigating battery fires and other fires, as well as what to do if they do occur. So we've got a number of awareness programs. We actually have a grant from OSHA that we've had for several years, and we just were awarded a new one that's training recycling those employees at recycling facilities around the country on battery and fire safety. We actually are working in partnership with an entity that is doing EV battery awareness. And it was launched in early August. We've already had 500 recycling employees go through it. And we anticipate several hundred in the next couple of weeks. So there's a lot that needs to be done to raise awareness, tell people how to safely handle this material and how to process it so it can ultimately be recycled, but done safely.
Robin, there's so many things that we could continue to talk about, but I want to thank you for your generous allocation of time to talk today. How can folks follow along with what ISRI is doing and learn more about, for instance, how to protect workers from battery fires?
That would be great. If you go to ISRI.org, our website, there's a lot of great information on there. And if you can't find what you're looking for, because there's so much information, sometimes it's hard to find the right information, please, your listeners should feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm at rwiener@isri.org, and I'd love to answer their questions.
That's an amazing level of accountability. Thanks. Robin, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
We've been speaking with Robin Wiener, president of ISRI, the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. You can learn more about ISRI at isri.org. That's ISRI.org, isri.org. The organization serves as the recycled materials industry's representative in Washington, D.C. and state capitals and organizes a wide range of industry initiatives. You know, recycling has gotten a bad rap in recent years, and not always for good reason. As Robin explained, when we talk about the overall plastic recycling rate, for example, which is an abysmal 5 to 6%, we miss the fact that some materials are collected and processed at much higher rates. And those materials, like PET beverage bottles, can be collected even more when states put deposit programs in place to encourage their return for recycling. But the challenge that recyclers face, along with the rest of us, is the limited range of choices in recyclable materials used in products and packaging. Consumer goods and packaging companies need to simplify their designs so that more materials can be recycled using the equipment that is available in local processing facilities today. It's encouraging to hear, yet again, that design for recyclability is a rising priority for product designers. But now is the time for a concerted effort to deliver on that promise. For now, each of us can act by looking closely at the products we are considering buying to understand whether we will be able to recycle it locally when we can no longer use it. The chasing triangles, which many people think indicates that something can be recycled, merely tells you what kind of material or plastic resin was used to make it. And that's why Earth911's recycling platform lets you search for 501 different materials. We're hopefully going to help you pre-cycle. So take a moment to see if, for example, the number 3 plastic packaging you're thinking of buying can be recycled locally. Unfortunately, the reality is it probably won't be, though some recycling programs can take number 3 or PVC plastic. You probably can't recycle it locally, and if you can't, you shouldn't buy it. And tell the retailer and the product's manufacturer why you didn't buy it. It sends a signal that this market needs to hear. So we'll keep track of what's going on in the recycling industry as always, but keep in mind that it's up to each of us to start to tell the companies that we do business with that we want better choices. I hope you'll take a minute to share this podcast or any of the more than 420 interviews that we've done on sustainability in your year with your friends, your family, your coworkers. You folks are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas so we can create less waste. So write a review on your favorite podcast platform and tell folks that you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of the other fine purveyors of podcast goodness out there. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we'll be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.